We started recently a project with a colleague from Warsaw University on web credibility. So the name tells you what it is about. It's about assessing whether the content of a web page or website is credible. So actually, that's a typical European thing. We got some money to do that, and now we can do it. So it's a research project. And the question is, what is credible information? And I think that is also what Hypothesis is about. And there is the problem, and then there is, of course, always an approach that you can take. And Hypothesis is promoting, if I can understand that correctly, annotation plus reputation as a mechanism to achieve that. We're looking at slightly different ideas, probably, but I think eventually they will converge, and I probably try to figure out how this will be going. Now, but just keep in mind, I think we should separate the problem from the solution, because in the discussions these two things go always together. And so my role as academics is to try to structure the world a bit without giving you really new ideas. So the first thing I did, I started to collect examples because I got caught by this idea about credibility. This seems to be a kind of complicated thing, much more complicated than you think at the beginning. Of course, if you ask someone on the street what is credibility, everyone will tell you, of course I know what it is, but then things get more complicated. So I gathered these are just some random examples I gathered. So politics is, of course, also a good topic for that. So their question was Osama bin Laden killed, and there was a lot of questioning about the credibility of this information and probably some of the details contained in that information. And so what's the interesting aspect about that? It's probably difficult for us to verify this ever, right? Another question is Barack Obama a Muslim? So I just recently heard that during the campaign, apparently some misinformation was placed on this topic. Now, this is probably something more easy to verify, but again, it's a credibility issue. One that puzzles me really, what I heard recently, I don't know whether you've heard this, North Korean citizens got into jail because their suffering about the death of the leader was not credible enough, right? You know, it could become dangerous. They don't have access to the internet now at the moment. I'm pretty sure about that, but assume the same things goes on in the internet and someone comes, your suffering is not credible enough, 3 months prison camp, I don't know. Science is another area where credibility plays a huge role. So fundamental questions like whether the Earth is flat, the opinions have changed about this. Like 1,000 years ago, people would have considered that as fairly credible information, right? Probably have changed our minds. 2012 is the end of the world. Again, some people believed that very strongly a long time ago, and probably still some people are waiting for this at the moment. The world was created 6,000 years ago. There the controversy starts to be already a bit more complicated, as I understand. Then we mentioned already is the climate changing. That's, of course, a much more serious issue we are dealing with nowadays. And more recently, are neutrinos faster than light? I don't know, have you heard about the story? They made this experiment, but now they're really puzzled and they don't know what to do. And what can we do about it, right? I come back to physics in a minute. Another area of business, obviously. So for some reason, unknown reason, I'm always reading first the negative recommendations about the place. That's the only useful source of information for me. So why is it so? Then what you're reading, is it authentic? So of course, we all know that there are people placing some random recommendations, but I learned this has become now a business. So you go to a business and you say, please write recommendations for this site, but please write it that they become indistinguishable in their features from original recommendations, right? That's the difficulty. You know, your spam detector will get into trouble there, because that's human intelligence that's trying to circumvent it. And then I'll take you later on this story I just the recent days found, which I found really fascinating, whether wine tastes better in Riedel glasses. I don't know whether you know Riedel glasses. It's I'm Austrian, so it's an Austrian manufacturer. They had a huge success with their glasses because the wine tastes better, okay? Now, whether we believe that or not, it's an interesting question. Now, so what I want to say, the more you think about it, the more complicated the things become, right? So you have some information that is relatively easy to verify for most of us, like a hotel recommendation, some that only probably a few will ever be able to verify, and some that we probably never know, like climate change, right? We can verify it in 10,000 years from now, but this is very difficult for us. Some information is changing credibility, obviously, over time. Something is considered by certain groups as credible and by others as not. Or, and that's the real glass case, some information is considered credible even if everyone knows it's factually wrong. So the story is that this company invented this idea that you have for every type of wine, you have a different form of glass, which is, from a perspective of selling glasses, a very interesting idea. Then experts in wine, you know, these popes of judging wines came and they said, indeed, it is true, which did not insignificantly help the success of this story. And then they did studies, blind studies, of course, and we know most people even have difficulties to distinguish red from white wine once they're blinded, and that they clearly showed it has no influence whatsoever. Still, people strongly believe it is true. So I think that's something really we should think about. Okay, so this evasivity, I don't know whether this exists, being evasive like that is, of the notion of credibility is a phenomenon that is not uncommon. Wherever we touch with computer science, basically the human space. So we had this problem with trust. So at the beginning we believed to understand what trust, and then a lot of research was done on what are mechanisms, then there was understanding built using theories, game theory and so on, to understand what trust really means, what are the underlying mechanisms, and we could better coin the notion. Or another example is, I just stumbled, these are really things I stumbled upon the recent time, activity. So we have mobile phones, people are analyzing now the sensors, and they would like to derive what the activity of a person is. So we all know what an activity is, right? Once you do that in an algorithmic fashion, you get stuck in the problem. At the end, you even don't know what an activity is, because you don't know exactly what you would like to recognize. It's coming, once you go into the details, extremely evasive. The same true for privacy. We're discussing a lot about privacy today. And then what happens, if you go into the details, you start to ask questions like, yes, but I want to protect against whom? But what can he really do? And what do I really want to protect? And the notion starts to really flow away under your fingers, right? And another example recently, even scientific discovery becomes a problem now. And this goes back to some discussions we had the recent years with physicists. We're building for them currently a system. I'll show you a screenshot in a second, because there's also some interesting links to some of the things we have seen this morning. And the physicists confirmed to me what I already suspected. No human being is nowadays really capable to verify whether a scientific discovery has truly been made, right? And difficulty is there are so many specialized subfields, and they pass basically some piece of information to the next one. But in this transfer, some things are lost, like, you know, error bounds and so on, they just ignore. Then they take this again as a fact, and we don't know if we compose all of this, whether then the neutrino was really faster than light or not. It's getting a tricky issue to decide. And so that's the screenshot I wanted to show. And we started to discuss this because we build a system with them, which is called ScienceWise, and it starts out as building a community. The goal of this community is to ontologically annotate papers. They do automatic extraction of concepts. So all of this is already online, and they have built already a significant community in the theoretical physics community, and now we are thinking about adding reputation. And I think it's a bit similar to what I've seen this morning with Reddit and Stack Overflow. There is a certain need. You build a community, and once the community here, suddenly you feel the need of reputation. And then thinking this further, basically scientific discovery will become a process of evaluating all pieces of information, their credibility, putting them together to decide then in this process ultimately, now is this discovery, has it been made or not? And I think this is very much also in line with the objectives that we are pursuing here. Okay, now I have to go back. So now, after all this confusion, I try to create some things that are relatively certain for me, nevertheless. So when we are talking about this topic, there's always interest involved, and I think that's key for me. I mean, we are not publishing or consuming information without having any interest. So I call this interested information and interesting information. And at the end, we are finding ourselves in a game theoretic situation. That's also the theoretical explanation of trust. And I think not in order to implement the real systems probably, but to understand the fundamental workings, we should probably make this analysis to understand what are the fundamental mechanisms. We might discover very simple then rules that help us to design better systems based on such understanding. And as long as we do not really touch this message, right, if you don't open the envelope and see what is the information that is handled, it's just an action, the message exchange, and so we're basically in the same situation as with the standard reputation-based trust. So the difference will come in when we look really at the information and at the content and do some analysis of that. And by the way, this message can be everything. It can be the original information, but this game theoretic thing goes on also for the annotations. So people annotate out of an interest, not just for fun, or a recommendation about someone, which is also not just happening like that. So we have really to see all these factors together. Second thing is it's highly context specific. So we're not talking about actually truth or anything like that. We're talking about beliefs that are formed in groups. They form in a kind of a complex situation with many players. We have publishers, we have consumers, we have recommenders, we have all these groups playing together. Then they are partitioned in some that find a piece of information interesting or non-interesting. You have the time dimension, which I don't show, and then you have all the relationships among different pieces of information, which I don't show either, so the graph becomes more and more complex, and it's a complex process that we need to understand. And the third thing related to this question of automating the process, right? So hypothesis is very strongly building on basically manual labor, right? Doing the annotations and having then a reputation mechanism. But I think some automation will be unavoidable if we want to scale up this to larger sizes. And the way this is usually done, you look at the messages, you try to extract some features, you try to learn how do the features correlate with certain interest situations. So the cloud up there is just a model of what is going on in the heads of all the participants, what is their incentive structures, and how do they interact with each other. And then we try to learn this, right? And we can learn this, and this is how it is done in web credibility research today a lot, doing studies and observing the users, right? And what I found interesting about these studies, you can see it better like that, is already the study itself is of course kind of biased in the sense that you come and say, okay, in order to learn these features, we designate a group of experts, which is already a choice that is taken. So already at the start, we're probably doing something wrong here. So we have to find ways to bootstrap this without having these pre-existing biases in the system. Okay, so I also was thinking about which might be some other areas we might to look into in order to better understand all of these. So trust management is an obvious thing. There is a lot of experience there. Web search actually is also something which at the surface is not really dealing with this kind of utilitarian perspective, but we all know this is not true, right? Search engines have a very utilitarian perspective at the end. An area that's probably less known is data quality research. So the database community has invested quite a lot of effort in defining techniques, processes, measures, and so on to measure quality of structured data. So not of text or content of web pages or whatever, but really of databases, relational databases, basically, to fix errors. And there I think there's a lot that could be learned from that. There's been another area I have done research, emergent semantics. So there the main idea was, can we basically build the agreement on symbols, right? So we have studied that in the context of schema mapping. So if you have two completely schemas using completely different names, are the methods, social agreement methods, how to construct now the mappings to relate those to each other. And similarly, we can think of the problem of credibility. Are the social mechanisms to establish measures of utility in a social process. I think that's what we are talking about here. Another area is interesting. We talked about privacy from the perspective of how do we protect the privacy in such a system? How do we not invade privacy too much and so on? But I think there's a much more deeper point here that is in credibility. We are talking about the interest in releasing some information and consuming some information, right? In privacy, if you think about it, you're talking about the question, I'm interested to release some information about me or not. So in a sense, it's almost the same problem, right? I'm giving only that this information, the interest situation is a bit specific because it's information that for some reason concerns myself. But at the end, the game that we play, again, is very similar here. And in marketing, we should probably read some marketing literature. These are probably the people that have studied most the question of how this game among producing some information for the consumers and consuming the information is played, and probably and that's where you find cases like this riddle, because at the end of the day, it is just the story about it is that some people want to believe certain things, right? The truth is not the issue here. The issue is what is the position or the view of the world of the recipient and of the sender of the information that is essential. Okay, so some conclusions on the problem itself. Annotations and reputation, that is a method, but we should continuously ask the question, are there others? So not confuse the solution with the problem. Is credibility the only problem, actually, right? I can have very credible information, but I'm just not interested in it, right? So we should probably also think about the utility and the importance of certain pieces of information. On the solution itself, I think as long as we don't touch the messages, reputation-based trust methods might be pretty fine, and we have a lot of experience that could be used there. And from the discussions I already take that, I mean, what is the major weakness is today is that there exists a lot of theory on the one hand, and there exists data on the other hand. And the theory is very rarely applied to the data because the data is highly sensitive, right? So if you could get hands on the data to test the models, we could probably get much more robust methods for trust estimation. And the riddle case shows that we have also to take into account non-rationality in some ways. I mean, the riddle glass is a completely non-rational thing. And the truth is not really something objective, it's just a social construct that we are dealing with. And for automation, I think at the end of the day, people pay a lot of attention today on the choice of the right features and the right machine learning method and so on. I think that's kind of the secondary problem. I think the main problem is what is the choice of the reference group? And then any decent technique for extracting the information will do the job. But it's a social network that is playing here the key role. And then there's also some thoughts on how to make a system like Hypothes.is successful. So this cold start problem we have discussed a lot. And also here the rationality, the incentives, I think play a key role, right? So one incentive might be, and this we heard today already in the morning repeatedly, is that some sort of quality control. I don't want to call it policing. I discussed that with Ernesto. We have to be politically more correct here. But this is a very strong incentive. And there exists theoretical evidence on reputation-based trust systems. As soon as you introduce a minimal amount of policing, you change completely the situation and they become much more efficient. So, and there's even some games, there exist games where just the threat of policing changes the game. You never do the policing in reality. So you can do it at zero cost in a sense. And the other is talking about reviewing. And that's also a discussion with Ernesto this morning. Another incentive might be to make this review process efficient. So if you're doing a scientific review process, you're not just saying, oh, here is a bunch of papers, here's a bunch of reviewers, do whatever you want. Some papers will get 50 reviews, 50 papers will get no reviews, and so on. No, I mean, we should, in a sense, maximize the information gain from every annotation in order to assess the quality of the information. And if we can give an indication that we can assure such processes, people might be incentivized to invest their energy into such a system. And finally, also another question that will come up very quickly is scalability and performance. I mean, some search engines probably were not successful because of PageRank, but because they had simply a shorter latency in producing answers. So I think that's also something not to forget. And also, when we designed the system, and again, for me, the discussions today were really interesting to hear about it. You're not outside of the system. You're part of the system. It's a self-referential thing. Sometimes it might be self-fulfilling prophecies that you generate, right? So we should think about our own role then as being part of the system itself.